All right, would you please rise and join me in the Pledge of Allegiance? I
pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you all for joining us this evening. Jody, could you call the roll, please?
Dennis,
Here.
Harold,
Here.
Hollenbaugh,
Here.
Musgrave,
Here.
Phipps. Here. Robinette.
Here.
Okay, the minutes from our June 16th meeting were distributed prior to this meeting. Are there any additions or corrections to those minutes? Hearing none, do I have a motion to approve?
So moved. Second.
Properly moved and seconded. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Pose same sign. Correspondence. Do we have any correspondence tonight, Joe?
We have one item. The mayor is requesting confirmation of an appointment to the Transportation Advisory Committee. The appointment is for Lisa Myers to serve through May 31st, 2026. This appointment is effective immediately.
Do I have a motion to approve Lisa Myers?
So moved. Second.
Properly moved and seconded. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Pose same sign. All right. Thank you for your service. Any further correspondence?
That's everything.
Okay. That brings us to lobby visitations. Do we have anyone signed up for lobby visitation this evening?
We do. Tom Galloway and Carol Fries. Ferris. Sorry. You can step to the podium.
If you could please state your name and address for the record.
Thomas Galloway, 168 Anchor Bay Drive, Perrysburg, Ohio. And Carol is with me from Maumee. I come tonight to mention to you, to bring you information on the Coalition for the National Infrastructure Bank. I think you all should have or soon be getting a packet with information. I've been working on this for the past several years, and Carol has recently gotten involved with this. This is an infrastructure bank that was designed by Alexander Hamilton at the beginning of the country to help us build our infrastructure. It's been used 4 times, including by Abraham Lincoln to help build, among other things, the Transcontinental Railroad, and it was used started by Herbert Hoover and picked up by FDR to complete the Reconstruction Finance Act, which helped not only build the war machine to help us win World War II, but was some of the seed money for the Interstate Highway Project. All 4 times that this has been used before, it's had a sunset clause on it. The legislation as we propose now does not. The legislation does not add to the deficit. It does not add to the debt. It uses treasury bills to fund the bank. And municipalities can borrow from that bank for such things as water infrastructure or the grid. My personal favorite is passenger and high-speed rail, but it also talks about water and sewage. It talks about affordable housing. In your packet, there is a copy of the resolution passed by the City of Toledo. There is a copy of the resolution passed by the City of Ravenna. There is a copy of the resolution passed by the City of Cleveland. I will note that TMACOG has signed on to this, that Lucas County has signed on to it, as have several others. If anybody is interested our organization would, that includes microeconomists that have worked with the International Monetary Fund for 25 years, would be more than happy to set up a Zoom meeting with any or all of you at any time to go into any further detail. Are there any questions that you would have that I can attempt to answer or Carol could answer?
Does anyone have any questions? I was wondering do you have this in a digital format that you could email to all of us?
I can send it all to you. Should I send it to?
Send it to Jody, and
Okay.
then she'll pass it on to us.
Okay, I'll do that. There's also a QR that you can scan to get things. There is a website that shows all of the various and sundry organizations and all of the webinars that we have been doing over the past several years. We normally have a webinar monthly. It's usually in the evening because there are people on the webinar from Maine, Florida, Arizona, Washington, and Alaska. So we try to set it at a time when anyone can make it.
All right. Thank you very much.
Thank you for your time.
Is there anyone else signed up for lobby visitation?
There is not.
Okay.
An email address.
All right. That will
Everything is
soon bring us to the introduction of new legislation.
as a PDF, if that works, and send it to council. Right, yeah, I have a copy. And send it to them. That's what I'll do. Okay. Yes, I will do that. Sorry.
Introduction of new legislation. Thank you, Mr. President. I have a resolution adopting an active transportation and complete streets policy for Bowling Green, as well as an ordinance accepting an easement from Daniel L. and Vicky L. Frobos for property located at 811 South Dunbridge Road.
Okay. Official reports, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Mr. President. Good evening, Council. I just had one quick comment. I wanted to take a moment to recognize the efforts of those responsible for presenting the great fireworks extravaganza that helped us celebrate our nation's birthday on July 3rd this year. As you know, Mary Hinkleman and the Chamber are the primary organizers of that event. They and their board and a good number of volunteers work really hard to organize those days' events, including the festival that takes place during the day before the fireworks and then the fireworks themselves. But there also are some very important partners that help present that. So I'd like to recognize the partnership also of the Wood County Fair Board and the Tractor Pullers Association. I think that the decision to move the fireworks to that location several years ago has proven to be a really good decision. I think that the feedback, at least that I get yearly, seems to be increased enthusiasm for that event every year. And I know that Mary and the Chamber and all of their investors and their volunteers are working really hard, along with members of those other two sponsoring organizations. So I just wanted to take a minute and recognize their efforts and say thank you to them for all that they do, and look forward to another exceptional program again next year. That completes my report, subject to any questions that you may have.
Anyone have any questions for the mayor this evening? Thank you very much. Municipal Administrator, Ms. Treader.
Good evening, Council. We had mentioned at the last meeting that Greg Robinette had requested that we go through all the items of legislation related to our recent meeting of the committee of the whole to make our recommendation. And so this evening, if Jody, you're able to switch over to table 3 here, we're just going to go ahead and put up each of those pieces of legislation and also respond to some other questions that have come up, and of course, answer any questions that you may have this evening as well as you look through that legislation that is all slated for second reading this evening. So let's go ahead and Dana and the mayor, please, if you have anything to jump in on, please do so. Again, this has been a teamwork here. So we start with ordinance 9286. And this legislation, actually, regardless of what happens with the other bonding, is something that our bond council is recommending that we pass. And what it allows is that when we spend money prior to a bond being issued, that we are then allowed to reimburse ourselves for those pre-expenses as long as they're applicable, as long as they're for the same purpose. So for example, you hire an engineer ahead of time. We have this recently at one of our wastewater projects. So we've hired the engineer, we've been doing the work, the project is then bonded. This allows us to include those engineering costs, for example, in the bond payment. So we would ask that this be passed when it gets its third reading on July 21st. Next, we get to ordinance 9287. And this is the actual change in the distribution of the current income tax. And as you recall at the presentation, we spent a lot of time talking about that 0.15% and the change to the Water Sewer Capital Improvement Fund. And here we see what that actual distribution would entail, and this would change that section of the code 95A.01 to include these new amounts. And as we talked about, we would be looking at a difference over a 3-year period of time, starting in 26 and in 28, setting that rate that we would then be moving forward on. Again, we would not ask this to go into effect. The legislation has it going in January 1 of 26. And you can see the 3 funds that are impacted here are the Water Sewer Capital Improvement Fund that goes down that 0.05 in 26, 27, and 28. Capital Improvement Fund, which then has the increase of from 0.16 to 0.2 to 0.24, and the Street Repair Fund going from 0.09 to 0.1 to 0.11 in that period of time. And this would go into effect and not go before the voters. So your passage of this would allow this to then go into effect. Again, we would ask that it be passed on the 21st. Ordinance 9288, this is that additional 0.15% income tax that we are requesting be placed on the ballot. This ordinance would put that, if the voters approve it, this would add this to the city's tax code. So the action we're asking on this is that you table it on the 21st while you await the vote. But then it would allow that you would have had your 3 readings, that should the citizens support that request for the 0.15 additional income tax, that at the next meeting, which would be November 17th, it could come off the table at the date certain as you would table it, and then it could be passed at that time.
Lori,
Yes.
on this one, if we table it until the second November meeting, and we make that motion at the next meeting, and we can't retable something,
Correct.
if it turned out that the vote ended up being really close and there needed to be a recount, and that might take a certain amount of time, and I think it's a matter of rule, it takes a certain amount of time to become officially certified. If we tabled it until the second meeting in November, there is a possible scenario where we really don't know whether it passed or not, but we can't do anything about it other than vote it up or down. Would it make more sense, just to take that scenario into account, to table it until the first meeting in December, or table it until a special meeting late November if that was needed?
Well, council could decide that, and I would look to the city attorney, but I think you could also potentially vote it down and then reintroduce the new one with 3 readings and an emergency clause at that time, if you found yourselves in that scenario.
That's what
But I'd look to the attorney to give us that.
You have any, Hunter, you have any
I don't have
preference?
anything additional to add, that's what I was thinking.
So should you find yourself in that scenario, you're right, you would be required to vote on it. You would vote down this and say, look, we don't know at this time. Once it's decided, if it is approved, we would reintroduce the legislation. You could, if you chose to, give it 3 readings and do the emergency clause at that time.
Okay, great. Thank you.
All right, this resolution 3885 is actually placing the issue before the voters. So this would be, again, to the 0.15% recommended by the administration to increase the income tax. And again, this, if passed by voters, it would be allocated for bond payments for 2 fire stations and fire equipment. Upon passage, if this is passed on the 21st, then this would trigger Jody working with the Board of Elections to get the paperwork over to place it on that November ballot. Our deadline on that is, I think, August 6th.
Laurie, on this one?
Yes.
The specifics are for 2 fire stations and fire equipment. Once those are paid off, this tax would continue, right?
Correct.
And what would it then therefore be able to be spent on?
The wording is for certain costs of city safety, Department of Safety and payment, and equipment. So safety, department, police, and fire.
Okay.
It would still be designated in a capital fund for those purposes after the 26 years. That's what we're looking at. The bond payment would be for 26 years.
So the voters would know for sure that it'll be used for safety.
Correct.
Okay, great, thank
In
you.
perpetuity, yes.
And the important thing to point out on this is that this 0.15% is necessary if we're going to build 2 fire stations. And that if this is voted down by the voters in November, we will not be building 2 new fire stations,
Correct.
as far as we know.
We would discuss that, yes, with council.
Come up with an alternate recommendation.
So our ordinance 9289 is actually authorizing the issuance of the bonds for the building of the 2 fire stations. Again, this is dependent on the November ballot. And as such, we would recommend that after the 3rd reading, it be tabled until November 17th, until such time as that vote has been completed, would again allow it to come off the table to be voted on. And as we discussed, there is an amount as well for the aerial ladder truck and equipment for the fire department. Same scenario, we would request that it be tabled until after the vote. And 9291 would authorize the contracting for the services related to the building of the fire stations. And that's really it. We would request passage of that on the July 21st, again, related to being able to move ahead with some of the preliminary designs while we await the vote. So we had talked a little bit, and there were some questions from council about the capital funding redistribution that we wanted to share with you. So we wanted to talk about the funding process and the designation. So again, want to make sure it's clear that ordinance 9187 that would authorize the redistribution will not be placed on the ballot, and it would go into effect on January 1st of 26. The 2 funds that would be getting the portions of redistribution that we saw earlier in the chart from the 4017 Water Sewer Capital Improvement Fund would go into the 4018 Capital Improvement Fund and the 4029 Street Repair Fund. And we want to note here, we gave you these fund descriptions because there are some questions about what can these funds be used for. And this is a pretty broad way that our funds are described, but they are in accordance with the standards from the state auditor, and they are broad on purpose because that allows for expenses as the years go by to fit into these different areas. But let's look a little more specifically at some of these distributions. So this is a chart you saw in the presentation before that shows the current 25 and what that would be, and moving to the 28 where we can see those differences. And as you recall, we're estimating that's approximately $2 million that would be moved from water sewer into the capital improvement fund and the street repair fund. And we've been asked, how was this recommendation arrived at? It was actually a pretty multifaceted look at how we made this decision, this recommendation to you. We looked at the historical funding gaps in the capital improvement fund as well as the street improvement fund. We looked at the amounts for advances and transfers, the police division renovation estimate that we'll get to in a moment here, as well as upcoming opportunities and obligations as well. We also looked at the other side, which is the impact of the 4017. By transferring $2 million out of that fund, there is an impact. And as Brian had shared with you during the presentation, they would be looking to recover approximately 1.5 million of that, and that would be through an adjustment on utility rates. We wanted to note that as we worked through this, we were simultaneously looking at the needs of the 4018 Capital Improvement Fund and the 4029 Street Repair Fund, along with what's going on in the 4017 fund. As we've mentioned before, the 4017 has a debt load on it and has made a significantly positive impact on this community. So we wanted to thread that needle very carefully on that adjustment to not make it too severe and cause another consequence. And arriving at the 0.15 together, working in tandem with the utilities, that's how we arrived at that recommendation. So you might ask, all right, as you were looking ahead at what your needs would be in these two funds, how did you come to these amounts? And I just want to remind you that, budgets are always a balancing act. So if you consider your home, you have this much income, and just like that, you know what your base obligations are. If you have a mortgage, you have utility bills, you have insurance that you're going to pay, you're going to take those base obligations. Then you're going to decide, all right, where are my priorities for my remaining funding? That is something we're very familiar with, that we do annually. Every year we take on a budget. And so in looking at this, we understand that certainly, everybody would prefer to have more money in a budget, but we need to be fiscally responsible as well. And we feel that we kept that balance here in something that we can attain moving forward. So the plans for the redistributed funds are to continuing looking at our capital expenses for equipment, vehicles, and building maintenance. We've talked to you in the past about the reduced, our deferred maintenance log, and we look to reduce that. That's something over the years we've not had a dedicated source to keeping our maintenance, particularly on our facilities. We would like to remedy that going forward. And then the police division renovation. So the part of the redistributed capital funds would be used for a bond payment on the renovations to the police station. The design work was pretty extensive with the police station. And although there is more work to be done, the basic work scope has been identified, and the current cost projections make allowances for unforeseen conditions as well as cost escalations that will occur in time, since this is a couple years out before we would do this project. And we understand that in setting this, we would have to stay within this budget. We've been asked, would you go back and ask for more money if the project went over? And the answer is no. this, we would stay within this budget. That is our obligation to stay within that redistributed funds in the capital improvement fund. If that were to occur, unforeseen circumstances, we would look at scope change before we would come back and ask for more additional funding. And the plans for the street capital. A note that street funding is actually funded in several places in the city budget, but with regard to the capital portion of it that we're talking about here, oftentimes what you're seeing in the street capital funds are a portion of a payment because we leverage grants so well with our street capital funds. And we've been asked about what can be funded there, and it is a very inclusive list. So sidewalks, right-of-way acquisition, curbs, safety measures, items related to engineering should that not be able to be done in-house, for example. There are also debt payments for road projects paid here, and we do have a repayment on an advance in this fund as well. And so we gave you here just a snapshot of the 4029 from this year to see all of the various items that were funded in the 4029 this year, which again, everything from curbs to pedestrian hybrid beacons to a shared use path. And as mentioned, we also have that debt service and the payback of an advance that we had experienced. So that completes what I had prepared, but again, our team is glad to clarify anything or answer any questions that you may have.
Mr. President.
Go ahead.
Laurie, we can stay on this slide for a moment. Is it a true statement that the 4029, which is labeled street repair, you can use that for not just street repair, but new streets?
Yes.
And is it true that you can use it on new or repaired sidewalks, whether they are adjacent to a street that's being worked on or not?
I would look to Dana to answer that, but generally, the way we've been structuring this is that the 4029, because these are the large capital projects, so a South Main project, for example.
Sure.
We would do the sidewalks there. We've been funding the 50/50 program and other sidewalks out of the 2012 Street Construction Fund, which is the allotment of the gas tax and the permissible license fees.
Yeah, I agree with Lori. I think it's more, to include a sidewalk, it would be part of a bigger street improvement project, just based on the wording of the street repair. Standard language is street construction, maintenance, and repair.
How difficult would it be to change the wording of the 4029 from street repair to street and sidewalk fund and make whatever wording changes may need to be made in the description? In other words, would you classify that more as just a clarification of what it can be spent on, or a radical change in the way the money would be spent?
Well, part of this is an answer for Hunter when it comes to creating funds, but when we created the fund, it's based on the revenue source and any other legal requirements to it. So just to change the name of the fund, I wouldn't recommend, because it has a standard listing in it, in the legislation of what you can use it for. To create a fund specifically for sidewalk repair, you have to name the revenue source. And if it's not mandated, if it's not a mandated revenue source to be used for such things, then that creation of that fund has to go to the state for approval. There's certain funds we can create on our own without that approval, but a specific fund with a specific non-mandated revenue source is the easy answer of when you have to send it to the state, so.
So if adhering to that, you'd said that one reason not to do it would be because you'd have to change the wording, but if our legislation is opening that up anyway, how difficult how difficult would it be in the legislation in 9287 to change the wording so that it is more descriptive of what it's being spent for, which is sidewalk, street and sidewalk fund, as opposed to just simply street repair.
Because it's the street repair fund. That's what the wording, I think you'd have to change the fund name itself in order to incorporate it in this. I think it's two separate things, and so I think that's about as,
I think that one of the considerations is that a lot of our funds, have a title, but they're used for a lot of things. So again, as you can see for this demonstration here, would this be the street, sidewalk, curb, professional services, debt repayment, advance? I'm not sure that changes what you're allowed to use it for.
I guess my question is, if it's already being used for street and sidewalk, not necessarily just repair, but street and sidewalk fund, if that's what it's being used for, and the usage wouldn't change, just the title, then wouldn't that make it clearer?
Bill, if I could, from my perspective, one consideration is the fact that advice that we've gotten from Dana and Hunter is that potentially changing the name in that fashion does potentially make the uses of that fund more restrictive. As you can see here, that fund just, in this calendar year was used for all of those different purposes. And if you begin to create specific references and titles or in fund descriptions for how those funds can be used, I think the opinion is you open yourself up to scrutiny from the auditors about whether or not you are appropriately utilizing funds if you're using them for purposes other than those that are named in the title. So from our perspective, the way it's currently worded, we have the ability to use it in a multitude of ways, as is demonstrated on that slide. So our recommendation is to just leave it the way it is so we have greater flexibility in how those funds can be utilized across many project categories.
Oh, thanks, but if it's labeled street repair and we're using it for more than street repair, then hasn't that ship sailed? If the auditor is saying, hey, that's okay, it says street repair, but look, you're using crossing signals, curbs, and roundabouts, et cetera, that's okay, then how would changing it to street and sidewalk fund be worse than its current name, which is strictly street repair?
I think that when I said that there's a standard language, there's a standard term throughout the ORC and cities. It's called street construction, maintenance, and repair. And you can pull 10 different sets of annual statements from streets, and they'll all have that fund. I wasn't here when we started this fund. My guess is they shortened the name to just street repair. And that standard language, street construction, maintenance, and repair, it's kind of like industry-wide or government-wide what it can be used for. And it includes all of those things, and we like it that way, and most cities like it that way because it's broad. So I think once you go and change your name to include that extra word, it makes a difference, and it just makes it stand out. So I think that would be the difference. I think street repair goes along with that street construction, maintenance, and repair acronym.
Let sleeping dogs lie?
Yes, that's what I would do.
Okay. Oh, that's very enlightening. A case for something being mislabeled being better. Okay. Thank you. I appreciate the extra education on that.
Does anyone else have any questions for Lori at this time?
Mr. President?
Yep.
Can you remind me when we can expect the final police station plan?
So we are continuing to work on that. That's part of what's going to be authorized in that legislation for contracting for continuing these services. Mayor, I don't know if we know our big update of there, but again, we have a lot of the design. We're just trying to hone in on it before we give you more specs.
Yeah, the legislation, one of the pieces of legislation under consideration now would allow us to proceed with that next level of design work, which would be more intensive and help us drive towards a more conclusive project cost. The final schedule for that is yet to be determined. If this legislation is approved, we'll go through our process of issuing RFQs and then determine who that design firm is going to be. Then we'll sit down and talk with them about the schedule. But the intent is that if passed, we'll be working or begin work on the design, the next stage design for both the fire stations and the police station very quickly. And they'll run parallel to one another. The design work that will enable us to begin construction on the fire stations will be completed more quickly. And the final design leading towards bidding and other moving towards construction-related activities on the police station will follow behind that. Remember, part of our logistical plan is if we're successful with all of this and the voters concur with our recommendation, we would first build the fire stations. Once the fire stations are completed, we would move into those, and then we would basically move the police operations out of the police station into the East Side Fire Station for the period of time necessary to do the renovation work on the police station. Once that's complete, then we would, of course, move them back in there, and then we would be done with the construction-related activities and begin to have conversations around redevelopment options or opportunities on the corner of East Worcester and Manville. I would say that right now our current schedule would call for us to be completed with the final stage of the construction, which is the completion of the police renovation, like around 2028.
Anyone have any other questions on this? No? All right, thank you very much.
Thanks.
I'm sure there will be more questions. City Attorney, Mr. Brown. Any questions for Mr. Brown? Oh, I'm sorry, go ahead.
No report.
Any questions for Mr. Brown? Trying to be efficient. Okay, that brings us to council committee reports.
Mr. President,
Mr. Robinette.
just a reminder that the Finance Committee will meet at 6:30 PM Monday, July 21st, just prior to the council meeting, to receive the second quarter 2025 review from the Finance Director.
Okay, any other council committee reports?
Mr. President, the
Mr. Harold.
Transportation and Safety Committee met a week ago and discussed some of what was actually covered here with respect to the implications for transportation and safety.
Okay,
Mr. President?
yes.
Immediately before council tonight, we held the Planning, Zoning, and Economic Development Committee held the required public hearings on ordinances 9281, 9283, and 9285.
Okay. Any unexpected fireworks?
No.
Okay, good to know. Any other council committee reports? Hearing none. Jody, will you lead us in the reading of legislation?
Legislation for first reading. Resolution 3886 for first reading. Resolution adopting an active transportation and complete streets policy for Bowling Green. Ordinance 9293 for first reading. Ordinance accepting easement from Daniel L. and Vicky L. Frobos for property located at 811 South Dunbridge Road. Legislation for second reading. Ordinance 9286 for second reading. An ordinance authorizing declarations of official intent under U.S. Treasury regulations with respect to reimbursements from proceeds of bonds, notes, or other obligations of temporary advances made for payments prior to issuance and related matters. Ordinance 9287 for second reading. An ordinance amending Section 95A.01 of the codified ordinances of the City of Bowling Green, Ohio, to redistribute the unvoted 1.5% of the income tax for a continuing period of time, beginning January 1, 2026, to allocate capital funds more proportionate to activities. Ordinance 9288 for second reading. An ordinance amending Section 95A.01 of the codified ordinances of the City of Bowling Green, Ohio, to provide for the levy of an additional 15/100% 0.15% income tax for a continuing period of time, beginning January 1, 2026, to provide funds to pay certain costs of the city's Department of Safety and the payment of securities issued therefore, and declaring an emergency. Resolution 3885 for second reading. A resolution declaring the necessity of an election on the question of approving the passage of an ordinance to amend Section 95A.01 of the codified ordinances of the City of Bowling Green, Ohio, in order to provide for the levy of an additional 15/100% 0.15% income tax for a continuing period of time, beginning January 1, 2026, to provide funds to pay certain costs of the city's Department of Safety and the payment of securities issued therefore. Ordinance 9289 for second reading. An ordinance to provide for the issuance and sale of bonds in the maximum principal amount of $27,720,000 for the purpose of paying costs of constructing, reconstructing, furnishing, and equipment, and otherwise improving city fire stations and acquiring certain real estate therefore, together with related site improvements and necessary appurtenances thereto, and declaring an emergency. Ordinance 9290 for second reading. An ordinance to provide for the issuance and sale of bonds in the maximum principal amount of $4,950,000 for the purpose of acquiring a fire truck and appurtenant equipment thereto, and other fire department apparatus and equipment for use by the city's fire division, and declaring an emergency. Ordinance 9291 for second reading. Ordinance authorizing the municipal administrator to enter into a contract or contracts for professional services, construction administration services, and construction for the building and renovation of city fire facilities. Ordinance 9292 for second reading. Ordinance amending and adopting changes to Section 30.115B of the codified ordinances of the City of Bowling Green, Ohio regarding sidewalk commission.
Mr. President,
Mr. Harold.
I would just like to inform council that there may be change made to this at the next meeting. There's a possibility of having an even better solution to the construction of the sidewalk commission. I'll be investigating it a little bit further, where I think we can just have a better composition of the sidewalk commission. And then also, what I would definitely want to do at the next meeting is amend it to include an emergency clause. And the reason for that is it's hoped that we have a sidewalk commission meeting in August. And if we don't have the emergency clause, then what would happen is it would go into effect 30 days after passage, and there would be, if it passed, a vacancy that would need to be filled. and that would be confirmed by council, and by the time you add all those council meetings and so forth, it would be past August. So just to let you all know that in an effort to have it become, if it passes, become law immediately, an emergency clause would be added. And then at the next council meeting, the first one in August, the mayor would be able to fill the vacancy subject to council's approval. So, and I will correspond with everyone to let you know ahead of time.
Mr. President?
Ms. Phipps?
Bill, it would also be helpful to just get some background in your thought process here at next meeting on this piece of legislation.
At the next meeting?
Sure. Or in an email, whatever you're planning to send out. It would also be nice to get the administration's reaction to these proposals as well.
Yeah, my intent is, we have had, since the legislation first came into being, and I can say that, put it together with the city attorney's help way back in the 80s. And so it fit a need for back then. Over time, there was a change made, actually it was more of a universal change to make it easier to fill vacancies. And what we have now is, and we had the advantage a few years back of having somebody on the Sidewalk Commission who had a perspective that we don't have. And that is they were wheelchair bound and motorized vehicle, however you wish to call it. And that perspective was very important. And unfortunately, he passed on. His father, who was, of course, very sensitive to the issues that come up, is on the Sidewalk Commission now. But it would be nice to have some sort of a way of assuring that there would be that kind of representation. And so what I had thought earlier would be, well, we have to have 7 members because it's, or 9. 9's a bit much, but have an odd number of members as opposed to like this body, which is odd members, but an odd number of members. And so that meant someone would have to go off. And that was my reasoning. But we can still accomplish what I think the goal would be and just have an even number of members. It's not like the Sidewalk Commission is repeatedly, 1 vote away from swinging things. So I don't think there's much of a chance of there being a tie vote. And even if there is a tie vote, that means it doesn't pass. So the intent here is to update it to the times that we have now and increase representation of a very important segment of our community. And where I was going to have addition by subtraction, I think it might make more sense just to have addition by addition. So that's the gist of it,
Okay,
which may have saved you reading a 3-page email from me.
okay.
All right. Jody?
Ordinance 9281 comes off the table automatically.
Mr. President,
Ms. Phipps?
I move to adopt ordinance 9281.
Second.
Properly moved and seconded. Is there any discussion? Hearing none. Jody?
Harold,
Yes.
Hollenbaugh,
Yes.
Musgrave,
Yes.
Phipps,
Yes.
Robinette,
Yes.
Dennis.
Yes.
Okay, ordinance 9281 is adopted.
Ordinance 9283 comes off the table automatically.
Mr. President,
Ms. Phipps?
I move to adopt ordinance 9283.
Second.
Properly moved and seconded. Is there any discussion? Jody?
Hollenbaugh,
Yes.
Musgrave,
Yes.
Phipps,
Yes.
Robinette,
Yes.
Dennis,
Yes.
Harold,
Yes.
Ordinance 9283 is adopted.
Ordinance 9285 comes off the table automatically.
Mr. President,
Ms. Phipps?
I move to adopt ordinance 9285.
Second.
Properly moved and seconded. Is there any discussion? Jody?
Musgrave,
Yes.
Phipps,
Yes.
Robinette,
Yes.
Dennis,
Yes.
Harold,
Yes.
Hollenbaugh.
Yes, ordinance 9285 is adopted. Is there any other business to come before council this evening?
President?
Mr. Harold.
In the interest of soliciting additional public input, specifically for the legislation related to increased fire and police safety facilities, as well as reallocation of funds, we had the Transportation and Safety Committee meeting last Monday to give people an opportunity to speak. And I would just want to say that I have set up a Fourth Ward quarterly meeting for Thursday, July 17th at 7 PM in the Simpson Building Meeting Room. So it's Thursday, July 17th at 7 PM, the Simpson Building Meeting Room. And of course, although it's Fourth Ward, everyone is welcome. And my hope is that it is yet another opportunity for the citizens to voice their questions and concerns and comment.
Okay. Would anyone like to excuse
I would like
Councilmember
to.
O'Dorisio?
So moved.
Second.
Properly moved and seconded. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Councilmember O'Dorisio is excused. Do I have a motion to adjourn?
So moved?
Second.
Oh, everybody wants to stay tonight.
So informative.
That's what I was like.
Properly
I want to
moved
go
and
home.
seconded. All in favor, say aye.
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 Opposed, same sign. We are adjourned. Thank you very much.